Welcome to the Screen MDM Talks podcast hosted by me, Mancha Daswani. This week our sponsor is MD Media Biz. Welcome back to Screen MDM Talks. I'm doing a special strand just for folks in the kids business as we head into TeamFalco's and MIP London. And so I'm thrilled to be welcoming today Nico Lockhart of TeamFalco. You guys are doing some really interesting things, Nico. So tell me a little bit about your origin story. You came out of Wild Brain. Tell me about why you wanted to set up this digital agency.
Thank you so much for having me/us on the podcast. I left my previous role as a head of digital studio for the last 5 years, having been at Wild Brain for 9. And I was talking to lots of people in the industry, in my network, and kind of the same challenges were being faced. And it was the same challenges I saw being faced over the last kind of 10 years is just understanding how to get onto YouTube in a way that, you know, can monetize effectively, but also build audiences. And those are still the challenges. They haven't changed over the period of time that I've been in the industry. And so it kept kind of being the same questions that are coming up and the types of queries that to me often demonstrated a little bit of a lack of understanding about how to approach that properly. A lot of the people were looking to industry leaders who had huge libraries and huge catalogues of content to jump onto YouTube. And that's not really the place that a lot of indies are in, a lot of IP owners are in. And so really it became a place of trying to follow that while that's not the path for you.
Yeah.
And so working with people who are wanting to develop a new show, have their first step on YouTube without a library was what really always excited me, and working with people who were developing new shows, new ideas. And so the piece that people were coming to me was the partnership of me and Jesse. It wasn't what I brought on my own. Having been kind of in production and a bit of development, that YouTube strategy was things that I knew, but again, it became a couple of steps beyond what I could do myself entirely. Jesse was the person that I was picking up the phone to help me with these proposals and help me with these conversations to get people understanding. And it just kind of then felt right. It was like, well, you know, we're wanting to demonstrate an understanding of audience through research, through, you know, YouTube is an algorithm platform. Research and understanding where you're going to bubble up is really, really critical.
Sure.
And so partnering both and thinking through content, thinking through the lenses of development, and then thinking through the lenses of landing on these platforms had to come together. So to me, it felt like a perfect partnership. And it's kind of been a great first year for us.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing. And so you've expanded already. I know David came on recently to sort of help build out your digital first IP slate. Tell me a little bit about that strategy, what you're looking to do there.
Yeah, so, you know, with what me and Jesse have been working on over the last year, we were always wanting to execute on the strategies that we were building. So, you know, we have a love of making the content as well as building the strategy. And so, you know, we were pulling together series proposals and that kind of demonstrate that strategy, demonstrate the development and what you should then go and execute. And so, you know, we needed a creative and producer to be able to lead that expansion, and both on the originals and the client side. So, you know, he's really plugged into the channels, into production, but again, leading the creative for both client and original. And, you know, given his track record of Boy and Dragon, well, definitely like an potentially unheard of IP. If you go look at its kind of size and scale on YouTube, for many months of last year, it was doing over 100 million monthly views. It's crossed over, you know, 7 billion views. I think 6 billion on the channel, and then, you know, over 7 million subscribers. So it's a really huge property. And I think on YouTube, often people say it's lightning in a bottle, but this guy's managed to make it strike twice. he's also had a number of other shows that have been hits, and so that includes a show called Emoji Town, which was in the teen space. But he's also kind of done lots of commercial projects for like Crayola and recently Radio Flyer, as well as others. So yeah, he was the guy to bring us in, and we'd obviously, the three of us have all worked together, and so there was that kind of trusting working relationship. So building what we want to do moving forward. He was the guy.
Now, I remember when I interviewed Louise Bucknell at Milkshake, I think it was last summer, and she was talking about going forward. She really needed producers to be coming to her with ideas that had something digital just sort of baked into it, so that when she is planning her launch strategy, she gets a sense of how she's going to be able to seed this across multiple platforms. Tell me a little bit about how producers need to embrace that sort of digital first thinking about incorporating your discovery mechanisms at the outset of a pitch, and not when you're 4 months into production.
Yeah, and so the way I see it is distribution has always impacted creative. Consumption has always impacted creative. So you have to, and really platforms are just the intersection of those two things. And platforms are more present than ever, before they were channels and now they're platforms. So I think to me it's those two things, and you would always understand how those two mechanics work. So whether it's commercial breaks or, streamer binging, YouTube is now just another one of those. So again, there are these specific elements that you have to then understand. And so YouTube is a click and watch platform, while being provided lots of other people who want you to watch their video just as much as the video you're watching right now. So you have to prove value. You also have to understand how to surface through all of that. So understanding, we call it, think about your audience neighborhood, and understand the neighborhood you want to bubble up in, and understanding the types of content that's working natively. So again, disregard things that have off-platform brand equity, because you're not then looking at apples for apples. If you're going in new and you're comparing it to a huge IP that existed off-platform, it's not the same. So you have to find native YouTube channels that are doing things in your space. And some of that stuff you might not like, right? And that's the honest truth of it as well. And that's okay. But what you have to do is extract elements of that and understand why, and really think about why audiences are engaging with it. And that sometimes is a tough pill to swallow, even for us, right? We can feel frustrated by that. But it's about taking some of that out and then almost stirring it into your own development. And that's kind of how we work, is doing that research, finding an audience neighborhood, finding some audience affinity, building this digital playbook that then really covers that kind of the data macro lens, some insights around that. You can then start to really surface creative elements and strategic elements of how to then land on YouTube effectively.
Right.
It still doesn't mean it's a guaranteed hit every time, but it at least nudges you, but also the algorithm into finding your audience. And often that can mean spending less on paid, right? Because a lot of people then want huge amounts of on paid dollars. But what we're saying, YouTube loves organic more than anything else. So actually, don't spend it on paid, spend it on research and analysis up front.
How do you balance that algorithm issue of, looking at the data versus gut instinct and natural instincts as a storyteller that you've had for a long time? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, so it's really, really important to know that 70% of YouTube watch time, so that the global audience of YouTube and the time spent on the platform is via the algorithm. So 70% is that. So it's content that YouTube has recommended to you, and that's through all the signals you've given via the stuff you click on, the stuff you click off, that you then click off, how long you spend on things, the things you do and don't subscribe to. That's really obviously less and less of an element, but it's really trying to kind of pull all of these different data points together. And I think that, first of all, we are wanting to always entertain audiences, like most people, but I think sometimes it is tapping into understanding where you want to land and the sorts of things that are being talked about, the topics, the themes, the approaches, the tone. That I think it often then can start to give you a lot of food for thought. And actually then that becomes, once you learn that, that's also what you can base your gut instinct of. So, we are practitioners that have spent, a long time making things for kids and teens, but I think it comes down to a mixture of like that audience analysis, that audience understanding, and not just, again, what you assume. I think it's also about having hunches, right? But then validating or contradicting them with that audience research. YouTube is an always on focus group, again, it's a kind of not always at that like qualitative level, but at that quantitative level, it's super valuable. And you can do that, you get all of that once you start uploading, but you can utilize all of that before uploading your first video as well.
Yeah, so interesting. Now, give me a sense. You were talking earlier about when you were talking to clients about if they should be doing paid advertising or investing that in R&D. Give me a sense. Obviously, no, I don't want you to reveal your secret sauce, but as you're working with your clients, how do you get to the grips of a property? Understand its DNA enough to start mapping out a strategy with them about how you're going to take it forward. Give me a sense of your process.
Yeah, so I mean, brand guardrails are always a good place to start, really understanding what is it that people want to say. What is it, that thing they want to say to an audience? What is it that they want that audience to feel? What are your, then also, what are your objectives here? Do you want to just say the thing and it grows? Or do you have very clear commercial goals that you're trying to deliver? And then also what are your current audience assumptions as well? Because I think that it's always really good to have those hunches that then we can start to explore and either kind of validate or adjust. And then that really helps you shape both your strategy and your IP. And again, sometimes it's not always about changing the underlying IP fundamentally. Often it's just about the subtle expression of it for YouTube or for the platform you're going to. So again, whether that's a different short form platform or, Roblox or other social things. Again, social being a slightly challenged, probably whatever I say on that will be out of date based off how some of the bans land in the coming months as well. So yeah, that's I think probably the things I would say around that.
We will come back to fans, I think, in a bit, but I want to talk about timelines. If you've got a property that, I was waiting, most of us were waiting, 2 years for Stranger Things, right? You forget in between. I know animation is one of those genres where it can take time. I know AI is helping that, but it can take a long time from commission, green light, to actual air date, and then in between seasons can also take time. What are some of the best practices you've learned about that cadence that you need to be able to keep your audience engaged as they're waiting for new things to come out?
For sure. And I think, again, it's really dependent on objectives and audience. And I think that there's been some super interesting examples recently of properties that have had a bit of a ripple, like The Amazing Digital Circus, where they're dropping an episode once every few months and it's doing really well. But they had 10 years of making a weekly show, built a community, and then were able to do that, right? So again, it's that thing of people can really hyper-focus on what's happening now and actually don't look at, what led them to be able to do that, right? So I think, I answered it slightly there, where again, I think honestly, you're looking at some kind of weekly cadence of delivery, of upload, but I think it's really understanding what your minimum viable product of launch is, building a production pipeline that delivers that, and then kind of building scope from there. And I think focusing down on what you're wanting to, as I said, what you're wanting to say, how do you create a pipeline that does that? And then once you can start to expand and grow from there. I don't think it's about throwing kind of all the bells and whistles and don't over decorate your cake early on, because YouTube, you don't know what's quite going to work. You can have a lot of the hunches and you can do a lot of validation, but you still want to kind of build along that way. So I think focusing in on what that is and building a production pipeline that works for that. And I think often you can do that within a few months of research, a few months of development, and get it out there and start working. So, you can have something live within kind of from, inception, from 6 to 12 months, and you should be going live.
Interesting. I remember chatting with the folks at dub it last year about the shocking amount of time kids are spending on these gaming platforms. I had no idea because I'm not a gamer, so I don't think I've ever been on Roblox. I have no idea what's going on there. But can you give me a sense of how you're looking at those spaces from the perspective of both seeding new IP, and also extending existing IP into those spaces?
Yes, I would say Roblox has a lot of similarities to YouTube over kind of 10 years ago, in the fact that, again, it's very much a click-based platform. So, again, an algorithmic surfacing platform. And again, kind of the length of time people spend on games has a real impact on surfacing in its algorithm. So again, a lot of these things are exactly how YouTube has worked for the last little while. So that I find, first of all, just as an interesting element. So there's lots of things that then you can assume and make some, reasonable assumptions of where that platform needs to go and change. And I think it is a place where we've seen huge amounts of features and premium dramas based off the well of AAA gaming IP. And I think that kind of indie games, mobile games, a lot of those, and Roblox, a lot of those kind of users and players are on YouTube first for their consumption habits, their media consumption, their video consumption habits, as well as obviously ancillary gaming formats. So I think that it's a perfect time for people to be kind of jumping across, whether that's as a Roblox IP owner or indie game IP owner or mobile game IP owner, to owning that and proving your audience is potentially bigger. And I do think that then there is opportunity to grow new audiences for your game there as well. I think narrative loops and game loops have similarities, but again, I think that it is something that has sometimes been challenged to kind of bring those two worlds together, but I think more and more we are seeing it work. And I think that, again, it's because we're having people who truly understand narrative loops versus game loops and how to translate those from one to the other. And it's not a one-for-one translation. So I think it is just those adjustments, and also really understanding what is it that the community and audience get and feel from it. Is it a social experience more than the actual game loop?
Right.
Is it something about how they spend that time there with friends? And so you need to then really capture that in any kind of, show or series that you make around that.
Sure. That's interesting. Now, in terms of the YouTube content creator ecosystem, we've seen a couple of hits come out of there, whether it's a Miss Rachel or a Blippi, all the stuff that Pocket Watch is doing. Are there characteristics of the YouTube first creator economy shows that you think traditional content creators should perhaps be embracing more in their own storytelling?
So I guess, to me, there have been these points of evolution in content creation that are always impacted by distribution and consumption. So, and that format. So that changes someone's experience. And that often then can change the kind of vocabulary or grammar. It doesn't underlyingly change the language, but it changes the vocabulary and grammar. And I think truly engaging with that and what is the culture and technology that has kind of evolved to this point of distribution and consumption, to then understand how to show up with a creative idea is critical. And I think that is the subtlety. Is a lot of people are showing up to YouTube like it is even linear TV. So I'm not even just streaming platforms, and it's not how the mechanics of it works. And, if someone's watching linear TV, they don't have the option to change it. They can change the channel, but they can't change the content stream. Whereas on YouTube, you can literally click off at any point. So you have to really go, hey, come watch my show. And then you have to say, wow, you have came and watched it. I am so appreciative of this. Then it can mean, and I'm not saying that verbally, explicitly. I guess what I'm saying is in this, it's got to have value, and you've got to provide payoff for someone actually committing to your works. Because otherwise they know that they can probably get some value elsewhere. And I'm meaning it in the kind of the most macro sense there.
Right. And just one thing about just sort of time and resources. I know I've wasted 2 hours choosing a thumbnail, right? Because, either I didn't look good or my guest didn't look good or whatever it was. There are so many decisions that go into executing on your digital first strategies, right? And figuring out where you're going to plow money into things. What what are the sort of key pieces of advice you would give to an upstart creator today about the KPIs that you really need to be paying attention to, and where your time is best spent when you only have a certain number of hours in a day and a certain budget to get all of this done, where you have to be everywhere?
Yeah, and so, YouTube rewards watch time. But then I think there is a kind of cross-sectional of like keeping an eye on your views as well as your watch time again. And I think to me it is those two that are helpful. But I think understanding, definitely click-through rates are important. But again, the way YouTube works, that again sometimes your video can grow and go to a wider audience, and that means that some metrics take a hit, but because that's going to a bigger audience, you're not going to appeal to as many people. So that's okay. So it's that thing of also just looking at the relationships between them is really, really important, as well as I think just trying to, again, I think you can get really obsessed with the metrics. And often it really is just kind of understanding what it is your audience want and giving it to them. And that's then that naturally, and communicating what you want to give them as well, effectively. And that's how you communicate a good thumbnail. It's not like, there's not like just put the big red YouTube arrow in and you're suddenly going to get a higher click-through rate. It's about how do you communicate the stories that you want to tell, and then providing that to the audience clearly and coherently, and don't make them work for it immediately. Again, it's not about like then being lazy in your storytelling. It's actually sometimes just making sure that they know that that's coming as well. Those are a few of the things that I would say. But yeah, it is a slow game as well. And I think that, I talked about having a weekly cadence. This can often be a 2 to 3 year road. So I guess it's also just not expecting that these numbers will be substantial for kind of 12, 18, 24 months. It really becomes a business at 36 months. And to me, that's, again, the tipping point. And you can have much kind of, a shorter road if you're an individual creator and maybe not in the kids space. But if you're trying to build an IP business around it, you are looking at that kind of longer road. And I think, from my perspective, hitting that 20 million monthly views is about the point where that starts to work. And if you're not hitting that kind of that level of viewership, then you're into a kind of a challenging place.
No, that's really good insight. Now, obviously, it hasn't been an easy road for the kids business. We saw quite a few companies go under over the last few years. And so give me a little bit of your roadmap of where you're taking your indie over the next 12 to 18 months or so. I know it's hard to have visibility in a landscape like this, but what are your big picture goals with your partners? And then what most excites you about being in this incredibly dynamic space, which I know is a tough one to navigate, but kids business folks are so dedicated. What keeps you enjoying this business, and what most excites you about how young ones are engaging with their content and creating their own content today?
Yeah, and so part of what we want to do is move out of just exclusively kids. And in some ways that's because what we're seeing and kind of trends are that like slightly older kids are wanting to watch what feels like more grown-up content. Yeah. And so we're really looking beyond that exclusively kind of kids audience. And I think more and more on YouTube, people want to come together as a community. And so you do need to look across audiences and then across like expressions of IP, and then ways in which to commercialize that. And so for us, it is about moving into a space that feels more broad. Maybe we'll tap into older kids, but also teens and kind of animation fans beyond that, communities beyond that. And then, understanding how to make that work, and a lot of that comes from just that audience scale. So those are, the numbers that I gave. I think if you were to get anywhere like that on a network TV show, you would be like over the moon. But again, that is the scale of audience you need on YouTube. And I think that even people who are kind of getting excited about 1 to 5 million views on YouTube, it's just not big enough. And so actually getting to that critical mass is really important for us. We want to tell great stories that can get to big audiences. And I think that you're totally right that there's a lot of challenging kids. And it doesn't mean that we've totally abandoned that. We have tons of knowledge and expertise on how to navigate that space. But I think that in this immediate term, while people are looking to see results, I think, and again, commercial results as well as audience results, that's partly why our focus is. And it's also just, it is also our elements of our insensibilities coming through. In terms of, I guess, like to answer your other question about just what I'm excited about, I think it's a really pivotal time for people to come together, share knowledge, share what's working for them. And I think navigating that and being one of those voices is exciting to me personally, and trying to figure out those, I guess, levers to pull, but also working with the team of Jesse and David when there's such forward-thinking creatives and producers, strategists, like in terms of always looking for the next one as well, to understand how to make that work and expand it, but also with some focus. So I think it's just a really interesting, it doesn't mean that we're not nervous at times as well, but that's also what drives us. I'd say that kind of, that lack of certainty means that you have to be more entrepreneurial, and you can't just go down a cookie cutter approach. It really is about looking at things at an individual level. There is no one specific way, and that's quite exciting.
Well, Nico, thank you for sharing some of your knowledge with me today. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time with me. Thank
you for having me and letting us share what we think, and love to keep talking.
Absolutely. I'll be coming to cover your session at MIP London. I'm looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Screen MDM Talks podcast, hosted by me, Mantra Daswani. Kate Roach is our VP of Global Ad Sales and Business Development. Production was done by Anand Patel. Musical score performed and composed by Jahan Raymond.